Daniel had always been the careful type. From the day he moved into the Oak Ridge Hills neighborhood, he kept his two-story brick home looking perfect. The grass was always cut just right, not too short and not too tall. The flowers along his walkway bloomed in bright colors every spring. His mailbox never leaned to one side like some of his neighbors. That's just how Daniel was. He paid attention to the little things. When he bought the house 3 years ago, Daniel did something most people skip. He actually sat down at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and read through all the rules of the neighborhood. These rules, written by the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short, were thick as a phone book. Most folks just signed without reading, but not Daniel. He highlighted important parts with a yellow marker and even made notes in the margins. Better to know the rules than be surprised later, he always told his friends. Life in Oak Ridge Hills was pretty good at first. The old HOA president, Mr. Thompson, was a friendly gray-haired man who waved to everyone on his morning walks. He ran the neighborhood meetings with a relaxed attitude. "We're all neighbors here," he'd say when small disagreements came up. "Let's be reasonable." But everything changed last fall when Mr. Thompson moved to Florida to be near his grandkids. That's when Patricia Coleman stepped in. Patricia had lived in the community for 20 years and had strong opinions about how things should be. She'd worked as an office manager before retiring, and boy did she love rules. She won the HOA election by just 7 votes, mostly because hardly anyone bothered to show up and vote. The changes started small. New notices appeared on the community bulletin board. Reminder: trash bins must be out of sight within 4 hours of collection. Then came the neighborhood newsletter with a whole page devoted to common violations and penalties. Soon after, people started finding little yellow papers tucked into their doors pointing out things that needed fixing. "Your garden hose should be stored when not in use," read the note Daniel found one Tuesday. He shook his head but coiled up the hose neatly in its bin. The following week, he found another note. "Holiday decorations must be removed within 5 days of holiday end." This was odd since Daniel hadn't put up any decorations yet. When he called the number on the note, Patricia answered. "Oh, that must have been meant for another house," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But while I have you, your grass is getting close to our height limit." Daniel measured his grass that evening. It was well within the limits. At the next monthly HOA meeting, Daniel noticed he wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. His neighbor, Tom, spoke up about getting fined for having an unapproved shade of white on his fence. "But it's just white," Tom said, sounding confused. "Our bylaws specify creamy cloud white for all perimeter fencing," Patricia replied, not looking up from her papers. "You used blank canvas white. That's clearly different." No one in the room could tell the difference when Tom held up paint samples. After the meeting, Daniel introduced himself to some neighbors who seemed just as frustrated. There was Raj from down the street who'd been cited for having a basketball hoop that was 2 inches taller than regulation. And Linda from the corner house who'd gotten in trouble for wind chimes that were causing noise pollution. "She's going a bit overboard," whispered Raj as they walked to their cars. Thompson never cared about this stuff. A week later, Daniel came home from the grocery store to find a formal violation notice stuck to his door with actual HOA letterhead. His crime? The trash bins had been visible from the street on collection day. Daniel read it twice to make sure he understood. The notice literally complained about his trash cans being out on the day they were supposed to be out for pickup. He took photos of the notice and the bins, then went inside to write a polite email to the HOA board. He quoted the exact bylaw that stated trash bins could remain at the curb until 8 p.m. on collection days. His email was factual and respectful, but made his point clear. 3 days later, he got a response. Exception noted. No further action required. It was signed by Patricia's assistant, not Patricia herself. Daniel thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The next Monday, he was working from home when he noticed a figure standing in his front yard. Through the window, he saw Patricia Coleman herself, clipboard in hand, taking notes while staring at his house. She walked around the edge of his property, occasionally stopping to write something down or take a picture with her phone. Daniel opened his front door. "Can I help you with something, Patricia?" She jumped a little, then straightened her posture. "Official HOA inspection," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "We're checking all properties this month." "Interesting," Daniel replied. "I didn't see any notice about inspections in the newsletter." "It was decided at the executive session," she said quickly. "Board members only." That evening, Daniel checked the HOA bylaws again. Sure enough, page 47 clearly stated, "Property. Inspections must be announced to all homeowners at least 72 hours in advance, except in cases of emergency." At the next HOA meeting, Daniel waited until the public comment section. He kept his voice calm as he addressed the room. "I'd like to note that unannounced property inspections are specifically prohibited in our bylaws," he said. "Several of us have noticed board members on our properties without proper notice." Patricia's face flushed. "We have the right to ensure compliance," she snapped. "With proper notice," Daniel corrected gently. "It's right here." He held up the highlighted page. The room grew quiet. A few people nodded in agreement with Daniel. "We'll take that under advisement," Patricia said coldly, then quickly moved on to the next agenda item. After that meeting, Daniel noticed something had changed. The random inspections of his property seemed to happen more often, always when he wasn't home. Neighbors texted him, "Patricia's at your house again," or "Someone from the HOA is taking pictures of your backyard." That's when Daniel decided it was time for a security system. Nothing flashy or obvious, just small weatherproof cameras with motion sensors that would alert his phone whenever someone came onto his property. The system stored everything in the cloud, where no one could mess with the footage. Just being careful, he told himself as he installed the final camera. He had no idea just how important that decision would soon become, or that Patricia Coleman was already planning something that would cross the line from annoying to illegal. Daniel was in the middle of a big meeting downtown when his phone buzzed in his pocket. At first, he ignored it. His boss was talking about quarterly numbers, and everyone was paying close attention. But then his phone buzzed again, and again. Something was triggering the motion alerts from his home security system. He waited until people were shuffling papers, and then quickly checked his phone under the table. What he saw made him sit up straight. Two men he'd never seen before were standing on his front porch. They weren't in any kind of official uniform, just plain work clothes. One guy was holding a toolbox. Daniel tapped the app to turn on the sound. Rain was falling steadily, making a soft patter on the porch roof. The men were talking in low voices, but the microphone picked them up clearly. "So we just changed the locks and that's it?" asked the shorter man, who had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The taller one nodded. "That's what Coleman said. Swap all the locks, give her the new keys, and leave the notice." She was very clear. "Don't call the homeowner first." Daniel felt his heart beating faster. Coleman. Patricia Coleman, the HOA president. These men were changing the locks on his house on her orders, without any warning? "What if the guy comes home while we're doing it?" asked the shorter man, looking around nervously. "Coleman said he's at work all day. Some big-shot office job downtown. We've got plenty of time." The taller man set down his toolbox and pulled out what looked like a lock-picking set. "Besides, she said he's been warned multiple times. This is all totally by the book." Daniel almost dropped his phone. Warned multiple times? About what? He hadn't received any warnings about lock changes. Nothing at all. His mind raced as he watched the men start working on his front door. "Hey, you okay?" whispered his co-worker Alex from across the table. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel leaned over. "Someone's breaking into my house right now. I need to step out." In the hallway, Daniel called the police. "There are two men changing the locks on my house without my permission," he explained to the dispatcher. "I can see them right now on my security camera." "Are you at home, sir?" the dispatcher asked. "No, I'm at work downtown, but this is happening right now." "We'll send an officer to check it out. Can you stay on the line?" Daniel agreed and kept watching through his security app. The men worked quickly, removing his front door deadbolt. One of them kept looking around nervously as if expecting someone to show up. "How many times has this homeowner been notified?" asked the shorter man. Coleman didn't say exactly, just that he's a troublemaker, keeps questioning the HOA rules. The taller man fitted a new lock into the door. "She said this will teach him a lesson about who's really in charge around here." Daniel felt a cold anger building inside him. This wasn't about rules or violations. This was personal. Patricia Coleman was using her position to target him because he had stood up to her at the meetings. Through the phone, the police dispatcher told him an officer was 5 minutes away, but by then the men had already finished installing the new lock. The taller one tested a key, turning it back and forth, to make sure it worked smoothly. "All right, that's done," he said, sounding relieved. "Now for the back door." Daniel's jaw dropped. They were changing all the locks, not just the front door. He watched helplessly as they moved around the side of the house toward the back entrance, disappearing from the first camera's view. Thankfully, his system had coverage there too, and he quickly switched to the backyard camera. The police dispatcher asked if he was still there. "Yes," Daniel said. "They've just changed my front door lock, and now they're starting on the back door. Can you tell the officer to hurry?" While he waited, Daniel took screenshots of everything: the men's faces, their van parked at the curb with no company name on it, the toolbox with the lock-picking tools. Everything that proved this wasn't a legitimate locksmith job. By the time the police car pulled up in front of his house, the men had finished the back door and were returning to the front. Daniel could see them freeze when they spotted the patrol car. "We're just doing some maintenance for the HOA," the taller man told the officer. His voice sounded steady, but his body language told a different story. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Do you have paperwork for this job?" the officer asked. The men looked at each other. The shorter one pulled an envelope from his pocket. "We're supposed to leave this for the homeowner. It explains everything." The officer took the envelope and examined it. "I'm going to need to see some ID from both of you, and any work orders you have." Daniel watched the whole scene unfold through his security app. The men produced driver's licenses but admitted they didn't have any formal work order, just verbal instructions from Patricia Coleman, the HOA president. "She told us the homeowner was violating HOA rules about emergency access," the taller man explained. "Said we needed to swap the locks today because he ignored multiple warnings." The officer looked skeptical. "Did you see these warnings yourselves?" "Well, no," admitted the shorter man. "Ms. Coleman just told us he'd been warned." After taking down all their information, the officer told them to leave without changing any more locks. Once they drove away, the officer opened the envelope they had left. Inside was a printed notice claiming Daniel had violated HOA rules by refusing to provide emergency access keys as required in Section 14 of the bylaws. According to the notice, he would need to attend the next HOA meeting and pay a $750 security violation fee to receive his new house keys. The officer called Daniel and read him the notice over the phone. "This doesn't sound right," the officer said. "HOAs don't typically have the authority to change locks without a court order." "They don't," Daniel confirmed. "I've read every page of the bylaws. They can request emergency access keys for certain situations, but they absolutely cannot change my locks without legal proceedings first." "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" the officer asked. "Since they've changed your locks, you won't be able to get in." Daniel smiled for the first time that day. "Actually, I have a spare key hidden where they wouldn't think to look, and I can get in through the garage with the keypad, but thank you for asking." "I'd suggest filing a formal complaint," the officer advised. "What they did here walks the line of breaking and entering, even with HOA claims." "Oh, I'll be doing more than filing a complaint," Daniel said, already thinking about his next steps. "I have everything on video. Them admitting Coleman sent. Them saying they're teaching me a lesson, all of it." As his meeting finally ended, Daniel gathered his things quickly. His co-workers noticed his serious expression. "Everything okay at home?" Alex asked. "Not yet," Daniel replied. but it will be. The rain had stopped by the time Daniel pulled into his neighborhood. The streets were still wet, puddles reflecting the late afternoon sun. As he drove slowly past Patricia Coleman's house, he noticed her car in the driveway. Was she waiting for a call from those men? Did she expect him to come pounding on her door, locked out of his own home and desperate for the new keys? Well, she'd be waiting a long time. Daniel parked in his driveway and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. His security cameras would detect his movement any second now. Those same cameras that had just saved him from a complete disaster. He looked up at the small device tucked discreetly under the eaves of his garage. Most people wouldn't even notice it was there. He hadn't gone overboard with his security system. No flashy signs in the yard announcing, "This home protected by." Nothing that screamed, "Paranoid homeowner." Just 4 small weatherproof cameras positioned to cover every approach to his house. They recorded only when they detected movement, and they saved everything directly to secure online storage. Even if someone found and smashed the cameras, the footage would already be safely backed up. Daniel smiled as he remembered the salesman's pitch. "Most people think they need cameras to catch burglars breaking in at night," the guy had said. "But you'd be surprised how often the problems happen in broad daylight, from people you'd never suspect." How right he'd been. Getting into his house wasn't going to be a problem. After his dad had once locked himself out during a visit, Daniel had installed a small combination lockbox hidden behind a loose brick in the garden wall. It contained a spare key to the back door, which now wouldn't work because of the lock change. But he also had the garage keypad entry, and from there he could access the house. Before doing anything else, Daniel pulled out his phone and downloaded all of today's security footage. He created a separate folder labeled HOA Lock Incident and saved multiple copies to different places: his cloud storage, his laptop, even emailing a set to his personal account as backup. If anything happened to one copy, he'd have others. The garage door hummed as it opened. Daniel parked inside, then immediately went to check the new locks. The workmanship was rushed and sloppy. The front door deadbolt wasn't even properly aligned with the strike plate. They'd been in such a hurry they hadn't bothered to make sure the lock worked smoothly. As expected, his original keys no longer worked. He tried them in both the front and back doors just to confirm what he already knew. Then he took photos of the new locks, close-up shots showing they were different from his originals. Inside the house, everything looked untouched. Daniel walked through each room anyway, checking carefully for any signs that someone had entered. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the very idea that somebody had messed with his home, his private space, made him feel uneasy. It was a violation, plain and simple. At his desk, Daniel opened his laptop and got to work. First, he played back all the security footage, watching it again from the beginning. The clarity was even better on the larger screen. You could clearly see the men's faces, hear their conversation, watch them looking around nervously as they worked. Every damning word was captured perfectly. Coleman said he's been warned multiple times. She said this will teach him a lesson. Daniel transcribed these quotes and others, noting the exact time they appeared in the footage. He even captured still images of the men's faces in their van. Next, he pulled out his copy of the HOA bylaws and flipped to the sections about access to properties. As he'd thought, Section 14 did mention emergency access, but the rules were very specific. In case of water leaks, fire, or other emergencies that may cause damage to neighboring properties, the HOA may request emergency access keys to be held by the property management company in a secure location. The key word was request, not demand or require. And nowhere did it state the HOA could change locks without permission. In fact, another section explicitly prohibited it. No representative of the HOA may alter, remove, or replace any part of a private residence, including doors, windows, locks, or other fixtures, without written consent from the homeowner or a court order. Daniel highlighted these sections and made copies. Then he went back to the security footage, focusing on the envelope the men had left. The officer had read it to him over the phone, but Daniel wanted to see exactly what Patricia had written. He found the clip where the officer opened the envelope. Zooming in, he could make out parts of the letter. It claimed he had repeatedly refused to comply with emergency access requirements, and that after multiple warnings, the board voted to exercise its right to change locks. Pure fiction. He had received no warnings, no notices, no communications at all about emergency access keys. And he had the footage to prove it was all a lie designed to teach him a lesson. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking. Patricia probably expected him to show up at the next HOA meeting, embarrassed and angry, checkbook in hand to pay that ridiculous $750 fee so he could get back into his own home. She wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. Instead, he was going to build a case. For the next few hours, Daniel worked methodically. He created a timeline of events, starting with his questioning of Patricia at HOA meetings, through the increased inspections of his property, to today's lock-changing incident. He gathered his bank statements showing he'd paid all HOA dues on time. He collected emails showing he'd complied with all legitimate HOA requests. Finally, he recorded a video of himself using his spare key to enter through the back entrance of his house, proving he had been illegally locked out of his own property. The timestamp on the video would show it was taken after the locks were changed. By midnight, Daniel had assembled a complete file: security footage, transcripts, photos, highlighted bylaws, timeline, payment records, and his personal statement describing the harassment. He saved digital copies in multiple locations and printed, a complete set that he placed in a binder. As he finally got ready for bed, his phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor, Tom. You weren't at Patricia's emergency HOA meeting tonight. Everything okay? Emergency meeting? On the same day they changed his locks. Daniel texted back, "What was the meeting about?" Tom's reply came quickly. Something about security concerns and problem residents. She had some plan for dealing with people who undermine community standards. Honestly, it was weird. Half the neighborhood didn't show up because there was almost no notice. Daniel smiled grimly as he plugged in his phone. So Patricia was already spinning her story, trying to get the community on her side before he could respond. She had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, he would take his evidence to people who could actually do something about it, who had real authority, not the made-up kind that Patricia was drunk on. As he drifted off to sleep, Daniel felt oddly calm. In trying to trap him, Patricia had walked right into a trap of her own making. And unlike her flimsy setup, his was built on something solid, the truth, backed up by undeniable evidence. All thanks to a security system that had seen everything. The county sheriff's office was busier than Daniel expected for a Wednesday morning. He waited on a hard plastic chair, his evidence binder on his lap and a USB drive in his pocket. Around him, people came and went, some looking worried, others just bored. A deputy called names every few minutes, and each time Daniel sat up straight, only to slump back when it wasn't his turn. He'd called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. This was too important to put off. He kept checking his watch, wondering if Patricia Coleman had noticed he hadn't shown up at his office today. Was she waiting for a panicked phone call from him, begging for his new house keys? "Daniel Reed?" a voice finally called. He stood up, clutching his binder. "That's me." The deputy who greeted him was older, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper, hair and tired eyes. His name tag read, Deputy Wilson. "I understand you have a complaint about illegal entry to your property?" the deputy said, leading Daniel to a small interview room. "Yes, sir. My homeowners association changed the locks on my house without permission while I was at work yesterday." Daniel placed his binder on the table between them. "I have video, evidence of the whole thing." Deputy Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Video evidence?" Daniel nodded and pulled out his phone. "Security cameras. I installed them a few months ago when the HOA president started doing surprise inspections of my property." He played the clearest clip, the one where the men explicitly mentioned Patricia Coleman's name and admitted she wanted to teach him a lesson. The deputy leaned forward, his expression changing from mild interest to serious concern. "Play that part again," he said. Daniel did. The men's voices filled the small room. Coleman said he's been warned multiple times. She said this will teach him a lesson about who's really in charge around here. Deputy Wilson sat back and rubbed his chin. I've dealt with HOA disputes before, but this crosses a line. Changing locks without permission or a court order is illegal entry and property tampering. Those men admitted on camera they were doing it to teach you a lesson. That makes it harassment, possibly even intimidation. For the next hour, Deputy Wilson went through Daniel's evidence methodically. The video footage, the fake violation notices, the highlighted bylaws showing the HOA had no authority to change locks. He took detailed notes and made copies of everything. The district attorney will want to see all this, he said, closing his notebook. This isn't just a civil dispute anymore. There could be criminal charges here. Daniel hadn't expected that. Criminal charges? I just want them to stop harassing me. Mr. Reed, what they did isn't just against HOA rules, it's against the law. Think about it. If your neighbor changed your locks without permission, that would be illegal, right? Being HOA president doesn't give someone special power to break into homes. By noon, Daniel had filed a formal complaint. Deputy Wilson assured him they would investigate immediately, starting with interviews of the two men who had changed the locks. Don't worry about your property for now, the deputy said as they shook hands. We'll have patrols go by your house regularly for the next few days just to keep an eye on things. As Daniel walked to his car, his phone rang. It was Alan Fisher, the attorney he'd contacted that morning. I got your email with the security footage, Alan said. Are you free to come by my office this afternoon? I'd like to get an emergency injunction filed before the end of the day. 3 hours later, Daniel sat in a wood-paneled office while Alan explained what would happen next. We're filing for an emergency injunction against the entire HOA board, Alan said, pushing a stack of papers across his desk for Daniel to sign. This will legally prevent them from coming near your property or taking any further actions against you until a judge reviews the case. How long will that take? Daniel asked. Given the evidence you've provided, especially the video, I've convinced the clerk to get us on the docket for tomorrow morning. Judge Hernandez takes property rights very seriously. She won't be happy about what the HOA did. Daniel signed the papers, his signature a little shaky. This was all moving so fast. What about the two men who changed my locks? They were just following orders. Alan shook his head. They're still responsible for their actions. The fact that they admitted on camera they knew it was to teach you a lesson means they understood it wasn't legitimate maintenance. But they'll probably get lighter treatment if they cooperate and testify against Coleman. As Daniel was leaving the law office, his phone buzzed with a news alert from the local paper's website. His stomach dropped when he saw the headline, Homeowner's Smart Security System Catches HOA in Alleged Criminal Act. How had they heard about this already? He tapped the article and read quickly. Someone at the sheriff's office must have tipped off a reporter. The article didn't mention names yet, just referred to a homeowner in Oak Ridge Hills and the HOA president. It described how security footage had captured men changing locks without permission on direct orders from the HOA president. Daniel's phone started ringing immediately. It was his neighbor, Tom. Dude, is this article about you and Patricia? Tom asked without preamble. Yeah, Daniel admitted. It's crazy how fast word is spreading. Everyone's talking about it. Patricia's been calling emergency board meetings left and right today. She's in full panic mode. Daniel wasn't surprised. Patricia had probably expected her lock plan to remain a secret between her and the maintenance men. She never anticipated being caught on video giving illegal orders. By evening, things had escalated even further. Deputy Wilson called to inform him that they had interviewed the two maintenance workers, who had quickly turned on Patricia when confronted with the video evidence. They provided signed statements confirming that Ms. Coleman specifically instructed them to change your locks without notice, the deputy explained. They claim she told them you were a troublemaker who needed to be put in his place, and that changing your locks would force you to pay the fine and stop questioning her authority at meetings. So what happens now? Daniel asked. Ms. Coleman has been asked to come in for questioning tomorrow morning. Based on the evidence in these statements, the DA is considering charging her with criminal trespass by proxy, property tampering, abuse of position, and possibly filing false documents since those violation notices were fabricated. Daniel felt a strange mix of vindication and discomfort. He had wanted Patricia to stop harassing him, but he hadn't set out to get her arrested. "This is all moving so quickly," he said. "That's what happens when there's clear evidence," Deputy Wilson replied. "Without those security cameras, this would be your word against hers, dragging on for months. Video changes everything." After the call ended, Daniel sat on his couch, trying to process it all. Tomorrow morning he would be in court for the emergency hearing. By afternoon, Patricia might be facing criminal charges. The local news was already picking up the story. All because he had decided to install a simple security system after feeling that something wasn't right. All because Patricia Coleman had underestimated him, thinking he would be an easy target. His phone kept buzzing with texts from neighbors who had seen the news article and put the pieces together. Everyone wanted details. Everyone had stories about their own run-ins with Patricia. The most surprising message came from Bill Johnson, a quiet man who had served on the HOA board for years. "I've been wanting to speak up about Patricia's behavior for months," his text read. "If you need another witness tomorrow, I'll be there." Things were about to change in Oak Ridge Hills, and it had all started with a security camera that saw everything. 6 months can change everything. Daniel thought about this as he stood in his front yard, trimming the hedges on a warm Saturday morning. Across the street, his neighbor Judy waved as she walked her dog. 2 houses down, the Thompsons were hosting a barbecue, the smell of grilled burgers drifting through the neighborhood. Oak Ridge Hills felt different now, lighter somehow. People actually talked to each other again, not just in hurried whispers about who might be breaking which obscure rule. The emergency hearing that day 6 months ago had gone exactly as Daniel's attorney predicted. Judge Hernandez had been visibly upset after watching the security footage. "In my 20 years on the bench," she had said, her voice stern, "I've seen many HOA disputes, but I have never seen such a clear abuse of position and disregard for homeowner rights." The judge hadn't just granted the emergency injunction. She had gone much further, ordering the immediate dissolution of the current HOA board and appointing a court administrator to run things until new elections could be held. Patricia Coleman hadn't even shown up for the hearing. According to her hastily hired attorney, she was too distraught to appear in person. The real reason came out later that day. She had been busy at the sheriff's office, answering questions about the criminal charges being filed against her. In the end, Patricia and 2 other board members who had helped plan the lock-changing scheme faced charges of illegal entry, property tampering, and abuse of power. They didn't go to jail. First-time offenders rarely did for nonviolent crimes, but they received probation, community service, and were banned from serving on any HOA board for 10 years. The civil case had been even more decisive. The court ordered the HOA to pay all of Daniel's legal expenses, plus damages for the illegal lockout. More importantly, the judge mandated a complete revision of the HOA bylaws to include strict limitations on entry to properties and clear penalties for board members who abuse their authority. Daniel dropped the hedge clippers and stretched his back. The new grass seed he'd planted last weekend was already sprouting, tiny green blades pushing up through the soil. Growth and renewal, that seemed to be the theme in Oak Ridge Hills these days. His phone buzzed with a text message from Nancy Chen, the new HOA board president. "Don't forget the board meeting tonight at 7. We need your input on the playground proposal." Daniel smiled as he read it. If someone had told him 6 months ago that he'd actually be looking forward to HOA meetings, he would have laughed in their face. But here he was, serving on the very board he'd once dreaded dealing with. He hadn't planned to get involved. After everything settled down, Daniel just wanted to go back to his quiet life. But then the nominations for the new board started coming in, and he was shocked to see his own name on the list, put forward by at least a dozen neighbors. "You stood up when no one else would," Tom had told him. "That's exactly the kind of person we need making decisions around here." Daniel had reluctantly agreed to serve, but only after making it clear that his focus would be on rebuilding trust in the community. No more gotcha fines or surprise inspections. No more petty power trips disguised as rule enforcement. His first motion as a board member had been to create a digital system where all violations, communications, and board actions would be recorded and accessible to all homeowners. Transparency was the best cure for the kind of secrecy that had allowed Patricia's abuse to flourish. The afternoon sun was getting hot. Daniel gathered his yard tools and headed inside for a cool drink. His security cameras were still in place, though he rarely checked them anymore. They were more like a comfortable backup now, not the vital protection they'd once been. As he poured himself some iced tea, Daniel's phone rang. It was Alan Fisher, his attorney. "Just checking in," Alan said. "The court administrator called me for an update. Sounds like the new board is working out well?" "Better than anyone expected," Daniel replied. "We've actually got people volunteering for committees again. And get this, compliance with the rules has gone up, even though we're issuing fewer violations." "That's what happens when people feel the rules are fair and applied equally," Alan observed. "By the way, did you hear Patricia Coleman is moving? My paralegal lives in the next subdivision over, and she said the house just went on the market." Daniel hadn't heard, but he wasn't surprised. It would be hard to face your neighbors after what had happened. He didn't feel any particular satisfaction at the news, just a quiet relief that that chapter was truly closing. After his call with Alan, Daniel sat down at his computer to look over the playground proposal for tonight's meeting. The old board would have rejected it immediately as potentially increasing liability insurance costs. But the new board saw it differently, as an investment in making the neighborhood more family-friendly. Looking through the budget numbers, Daniel noticed they were still paying for the old security company that Patricia had hired, the one that did those random inspections that had started all the trouble. He made a note to suggest switching to a more reputable firm with transparent policies. A knock at the door interrupted his work. It was Amy Taylor, a new homeowner who had moved in just last month. "Sorry to bother you," she said, "but Tom mentioned you might have a copy of the revised bylaws. I want to put up a small fence for my dog, and I want to make sure I'm following all the rules before I start." "No bother at all," Daniel assured her, inviting her in. "The fence guidelines are actually pretty simple now, let me show you." As he printed out the relevant sections for Amy, explaining the reasonable height restrictions and material options, Daniel realized how much things had changed. A year ago, this same conversation would have been tense and filled with warnings about steep fines for non-compliance. Now it was just neighbors helping neighbors navigate sensible guidelines. After Amy left, Daniel went back to preparing for the evening's meeting. He'd come a long way from that rainy day when he'd watched strangers changing his locks through a security app. That day he'd felt powerless and violated. Today he felt part of something positive, a community rebuilding itself on principles of fairness and respect. The case had become something of a local legend. The community college even used it in their property law classes as an example of how modern technology could help homeowners protect their rights against overreaching authorities. And whenever Patricia Coleman's name came up in local conversations, it was invariably followed by that cautionary phrase that had somehow caught on throughout the neighborhood. "Remember what happened with that security system?" Daniel smiled at the thought. Sometimes the best defense wasn't fighting back. It was simply making sure the truth couldn't be denied. His quiet cameras had spoken louder than any argument ever could, and that had made all the difference.